Gratitude, Mr. Speaker. If everybody in this country made decisions the way that you do, would America collapse or would it evolve? It's an internal question I ask myself. If every judge interpreted the law the way that you do, if every pastor interpreted the scripture the way that you do, if every legislator exercised power the way that you do, would the collective we, the people, expand, or would we shrink to a selective we, the people? I ask this, and I ask it of myself all the time, Mr. Speaker, because interpretation matters. It is the difference between perception and perspective. I remember maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago. It had to be more than that, COVID. Maybe 5 years ago, I called my late grandmother, of course, after The View, and I ended up talking to her for some odd reason about unicorns. And she stopped me mid-sentence, Mr. Speaker, and she said, "Now, child, you know that's in the Bible." And I said, "Nah, Grandma, unicorns isn't in the Bible." And she said, "Yeah, child," and stuff, it is. Now, she used to keep this little mustard bottle by her on the table, one of them old school ones that were like circular, and she put in there her hot water. She would call it hot water. That was her liquor, y'all. And I was thinking, like, Grandma done had too much hot water. But I know she'd never ever overindulge in everything except for her word with a capital W. She gave me that good old COPD cough, and she said, "Go to Job 39:9. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm about to Google this, because there ain't no way that unicorns are in the Bible. And there was. She said, that ain't the only place either. My grandmother used the King James Version of the Bible, and that translation had unicorn in it. Numbers also mentions it. Now, modern scholars, Mr. Speaker, their version replace it. They replace it with the Hebrew word, or they replace it with the word wild ox. But here's the thing about that, is that with that one edit, it sort of changes the translation of what the sentence means to the mind's eye. Putting that together to what's happening in this time. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, oppression doesn't show up as a whip. It shows up as an interpretation. For clarity, there is also a passage in Genesis where Noah's son Ham, Noah got drunk. I'm just going to preface this. He was naked in the vineyard. Ham saw him, went and told his brothers. His dad was like, "You're disrespectful, and I'm going to curse your child." Right? He said, your son's going to be a servant of servants. That text itself did not mention race. But in American history, that story was twisted and became what is known as the curse of Ham doctrine. A claim that African people were divinely destined for slavery. That theology was preached from pulpits to justify bondage. And that blows my mind, Mr. Speaker.
Me too.
At the same time, those same enslaved Africans who were forced into Christianity read the same book and found Exodus. Let my people go. They found prophets condemning injustice, Mr. Speaker. They found that all people were made in the image of God. Same text, different interpretation. Mr. Speaker, I am not here to disrespect anybody's faith. I grew up in it, I value it, but we all have to tell the truth about human behavior. God doesn't need editing, we do. And whenever people handle sacred texts, there's a risk. We start translating our discomfort instead of translating the text.
Okay.
We start sanding down what is wild so that it can fit into our pockets. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, interpretation, it's guided by humanity. And sometimes it's guided by convenience. Sometimes it's guided by consciousness, and sometimes it's guided by agenda. America has two civic scriptures, Mr. Speaker. We got the Bible, and we got that Constitution. Both are quoted in this chamber. Both invoke to justify power. Both treated as sacred. Both have been used to discipline black bodies. That is the American way. Our civic scripture, the Constitution, at its founding, Mr. Speaker, it contained compromises with enslavement. The First Amendment, Mr. Speaker, it promised freedom of speech. And yet it was a crime for our ancestor to even speak the word freedom. But here's what also belongs to our history. Black Americans have never abandoned the Constitution. We insisted that it applied. With the promise of speech, association, and petition, we petitioned under the First Amendment. In Virginia, black families use the First Amendment through the NAACP to get together to say we need to desegregate. With the promise of due process and equal protection, those same folks, we went ahead and litigated under the 14th Amendment. And when the Commonwealth even tried to choke off that ability by, here in Virginia, in this body, creating the Virginia Code, Chapter 33, saying, NAACP, y'all ain't got no right. The courts of Virginia said, no, y'all ain't got no right. The Supreme Court of Virginia said no. It took the United States Supreme Court to say, you do. NAACP versus Bud. With the promise of freedom, Mr. Speaker, we pushed for the 13th Amendment to mean something in real life. But that loophole said, except as punishment for a crime. We were free in name and re-enslaved through policy. The promise of voting rights, regardless of your race, was made, but met with poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, white-only primaries, terrorism by the KKK. We demanded enforcement. We have worked through these mechanisms that the framers left behind, Mr. Speaker. The founding fathers were not perfect men, but they wrote these soaring words about liberty and while tolerating bondage. That contradiction is a part of our inheritance. But they also did something profoundly wise. They did not write a frozen document. They built amendability, Article 5. Right? It outlines the amendment process, a pathway for correction, a mechanism for redress. They understood they were not final. The Constitution was incomplete at birth. It was not closed. And because it was not closed, a generation of Americans, especially black Americans, labored inside that space, not tearing it down, but calling it into itself. Today, working on the Constitution, to me, it feels so naive. It feels like naivete for somebody like me to say that. But my mature mind knows, Mr. Speaker, that it is covenant work. And that every time my folks did that covenant work, every time it was exercised, resistance was built. And in building, architecture can be renovated, which brings me back to interpretation. Mr. Speaker, whiteness was expanded when it was politically convenient, while blackness has remained a fixed line. Now here is part that, I think this is a part that we don't always say out loud. Okay. When black folks were reaching for that promise, not only did America build these barriers, they've started recruiting. You see, whiteness at the time, and still, it's not just an identity. In American history, whiteness functioned as a kind of membership, And I want to tread very carefully here. I am not talking about individual hearts, Mr. Speaker. I am talking about structures. Over time, the legal and social boundaries of belonging in this country shifted. Groups excluded from whiteness were gradually incorporated into it. And again, this is not any accusation. This is about structural observation. During the peak of Irish immigration in the mid-19th century, Irish Catholics faced immense discrimination from the Protestant folks. They were caricatured as ape-like, violent, unfit for self-governing. Some newspapers and political cartoons placed them socially along the side of black folks. But over time, that boundary shifted, and Irish Americans were folded into whiteness. That line moved, but again, blackness did not move. And although they were legally classified for naturalization purposes, even the Italians, specifically the Southern Italians, faced intense racial discrimination and weren't even considered socially white until the 19th and 20th century. Citizenship laws, court cases, who counted them as white to expand political suffrage while restricting black folks. These things are documented in our history. Boundaries move. And I'm not saying to anybody listening to our conversation right now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying they wrote those laws. What I'm saying again is that we inherited a system where they existed, and we have a choice. Pretend it's real, pretend that it's not real, or stop it from repeating. So let me come back to that question, Mr. Speaker. If everybody interpreted power the way that black Americans have in history, would we collapse or would we evolve? I'll close by saying this. Right before I was supposed to be leaving to come to session, I was standing in that same kitchen I was pacing in with my grandma telling me about them daggum unicorns in the Bible. I had my clothes laying all over the kitchen because I couldn't get myself to get in the car to come down here to start session. I thought if I just changed my environment, that maybe I'd get to it. And I think my daughter could see the weight that was on me with trying to mentally prepare. And she just looked at me and said, "Ma, get up the road." She did not give me the sympathy that I was expecting. So I called my spouse. And I said, I'm stuck. And I just can't get out the door. And he said to me, "Jack, do you know who you are?" I said, I am tired, I am anxious, and I am sad to be leaving. He said, no. I want you to hear this. You can be right or you can be safe, but you cannot be both. You are a unicorn, and unicorns are hunted. The sooner you get comfortable, the better you gonna move. Now get up the road. Black Americans have lived as unicorns inside these two covenants, hunted, revised, misinterpreted, and still believing, still serving, still voting, still litigating, still amending, still calling America into itself. Black folks, stubborn, praying, tax-paying black folks, keep reading them like the promise applied to them. Mr. Speaker, we were denied literacy, yet we memorized scripture. We were denied citizenship, yet we fought wars. We were denied to vote, yet we organized democracy. And if the belief in the Constitution means demanding that it lives up to its own words, or the scripture was written not to oppress, then black Americans are the truest of believers. Black history is not a guilt trip, Mr. Speaker. It is a field manual. It teaches us it costs to insist that the promise is real. Now I'm going to ask for your permission for something, Mr. Speaker, because I know when we're doing this, we're supposed to speak to the speaker. I'm asking permission to speak to the body. See? Oh, no. Okay? If you are in this chamber and you are trying to do the right thing in a hard time, if you are trying to expand the participation instead of restrict it, if you are trying to interpret our founding documents toward inclusion instead of fear, you too may feel hunted. That discomfort is not danger. It means that you are simply untamable. We can be the kind of Americans who get defensive about history, or we can be the kind of Americans who get responsible with it. Gratitude, Mr. Speaker.
Clerk will call the calendar.
Calendar for today for the Virginia House of Delegates this Wednesday, February 25th. First category, Senate bills on third reading, uncontested calendar. Senate Bill 3 on page 1 and Senate Bill 88 are out of the block. Therefore, the first bill on page 2 within this Senate Bill's third reading uncontested calendar is Senate Bill 127. Is legislation amending portions of the Acts of Assembly of 1942, which provided a charter for the town of Chatham in Pittsylvania County relating to town powers and town council. Legislation report committee on county, cities, and